How well do you prepare for the future? Sometimes it can be quite difficult to preconceive what is going to actually take place, but what we'll notice in Numbers chapter 36 as we unpack the law about the daughters of Zelophehad and the tribe preserving marriage rule, it shows how a good intention or a family asset can quietly slip away because no one has actually planned for the future. And when inheritance isn't protected, blessing can actually become loss. And in Numbers chapter 36, we'll unpack how the law about the daughters of Zelophehad and the tribe preserving marriage rule actually shows how community, property, and covenant all intersect. And I'll give you one immediate action to protect what matters in your family or community in this episode of Biblical Unlocks. This show is designed to help build your habit of reading the Bible, understanding the Bible, and applying it in your daily life. If you enjoy episodes like this, please consider following and rating the show. It's free, it helps me out a lot, and you can always change your mind later. Okay, now let's get a little bit of context into this chapter. So, Numbers chapter 36, it resolves a land inheritance issue raised after the case of the daughters of Zelophehad. Now, you might remember the daughters of Zelophehad from a while back in a previous chapter of Numbers, and it was how the daughters of Zelophehad, who we had talked about previously, who had successfully claimed land because there was no sons, the tribal leaders actually worry that inherited land would pass out of the tribe by marriage. So Moses issues a clarifying command that daughters may inherit, but they must marry within their father's tribe so that land allotments remain intact. And the chapter actually ties together private inheritance to public covenant order, and that's what we're going to see in Numbers chapter 36. So I'm going to read it in three sections, the first 4 verses. I'm going to read first, obviously, and this is going to be focused on the tribal leaders and their objection to daughters' inheritance. And the engagement question for this particular section is, why worry that daughters marrying outsiders will actually threaten the tribal land? Why is this worry even here? What is the basis behind this worry? Okay, let's think about this. Verse 1. The heads of the ancestral houses of the clans of the descendants of Gilead, son of Machir, son of Manasseh, of the Josephite clans, came forward and spoke in the presence of Moses and the leaders, the heads of the ancestral houses of the Israelites. They said, "The Lord commanded my Lord to give the land for inheritance by lot to the Israelites, and my Lord was commanded by the Lord to give the inheritance of our brother Zelophehad to his daughters. But if they are married into another Israelite tribe, then their inheritance will be taken away from the inheritance of our ancestors and added to the inheritance of the tribe into which they marry. So it will be taken away from the allotted portion of our inheritance. And when the jubilee of the Israelites come, then their inheritance will be added to the inheritance of the tribe into which they have married, and their inheritance will be taken from the inheritance of our ancestral tribe." Alright, biblical unlock number 1. Why do the tribal leaders object to the daughters inheriting land? Their worry is actually a structural one, okay? So the Israelites had an allotment system which was tribal. It was not individualistic. If an heiress married outside her tribe, her land could effectively transfer to another tribe, which actually, according to them, undermined the covenant balance of territory that preserved the tribal identity and responsibility. The objection isn't merely about property greed, although that argument could be made. We can't exactly assess the individual perception of the people who are making these claims, but it's about preserving the social geometry that God has actually established for Israel's communal life. The idea is, and the objection that is raised is, well, we want to preserve God's land, and we want to be under God's covenant. We do not want to go out and engage in debauchery and stray away from that covenant. So it's actually a good thing to actually assess, okay, what is going on here? Am I acting out of personal greed, or am I adequately following God's path? Okay, now verses 5 to 12, this is going to be about Moses' ruling. So girls may inherit, but they must marry within the tribe. My question for you to stay engaged is, how does the solution protect both women's rights and communal property? Okay, let's read verses 5 to 12 now. Then Moses commanded the Israelites according to the word of the Lord, saying, "The descendants of the tribe of Joseph are right in what they are saying. This is what the Lord commands concerning the daughters of Zelophehad, saying, let them marry whom they think best. Only it must be into a clan of their father's tribe that they are married, so that no inheritance of the Israelites shall be transferred from one tribe to another. For all Israelites shall retain the inheritance of their ancestral tribes. Every daughter who possesses an inheritance in any tribe of the Israelites shall marry one from the clan of her father's tribe, so that all Israelites may continue to possess their ancestral inheritance. No inheritance shall be transferred from one tribe to another, for each of the tribes of the Israelites shall retain its own inheritance. The daughters of Zelophehad did as the Lord had commanded Moses. Mahlah, Tirzah, Hoglah, Milcah, and Noah, the daughters of Zelophehad, married sons of their father's brothers. They were married into the clans of the descendants of Manasseh, son of Joseph, and their inheritance remained in the tribe of their father's clan. Okay, biblical unlock number 2. There are two major problems, I guess you could say, with this particular passage. The first one is requiring intra-tribal marriage even a protection, or is this just an injustice to women, right? The ruling does two things at once. Firstly, it affirms the daughter's legal right to inherit, right? It is a corrective for their prior exclusion, and it allows the public order by tethering inheritance, to the tribe. In context, this is actually a pragmatic solution. It grants vulnerable women property while preventing the fracturing of tribal obligations and land distribution. Now, the other problem with this is the following. In verse 11, right, we see Mahlah, Tirzah, Hoglah, Milcah, and Noah. These are the daughters of Zelophehad, married sons of their father's brothers, their cousins, right? So they married their cousins. Now, this is quite, obviously it's quite frowned upon now, but it seems that it is permitted in this particular case. Why? So we need to go back to the context of the book of Numbers 36, right? Or the book of Numbers in chapter 36. We saw in the earlier chapter, Numbers chapter 27, that the daughters of Zelophehad actually petitioned Moses for the right to inherit their father's land because he had no son, and God actually grants their request. However, in chapter 36, what we're reading right now, the leaders from the tribe of Joseph, specifically the clan of Manasseh, they raise a concern, which is what we saw in the first few verses. If these women marry men from another tribe, their land, which is inherited, would transfer over to that tribe. And over time, land allotments between Israel's tribe would shift, right? So there will be an imbalance in the covenant between all of the tribes. So in order to prevent the tribal land from permanently passing to another tribe, God instructs that women who inherit land must marry within their own tribe. And the daughters in this case may actually marry their paternal cousins in order to keep the property within the tribe of Manasseh. And the key reasons is because they want to, one, preserve tribal inheritance, because the land was tied to tribal identity and the covenant promises. Two, for economic stability, so that the property stayed within the clan structure. And three, for covenant theology, that each tribe's inheritance was seen as divinely assigned. It also should be mentioned that in the ancient Near East, cousin marriage, especially between paternal cousins, was actually a common practice. Even though the Torah in Leviticus chapter 18 actually forbids certain close relations, as we see in Leviticus 18, it doesn't actually forbid marriage between cousins. However, it's frowned upon in Christian communities now. And how should Christians read this passage in light of what they know? Well, the modern context suggests something completely different, because there are civil laws and health concerns that are affected by cousin marriage. For example, there's the risk of genetic disorders in children from repeated close relative relationships. And modern inheritance systems, right, they don't require keeping property within the clan. So the entire premise of why this arrangement was necessary in the ancient Near East, or even in Numbers 36, it doesn't apply today anyway. Now, if we want to know what Christians believe today, there's actually no universal rule. Now, most of the time it is discouraged. And for example, the Catholic Church has historically discouraged close kin marriages. Protestantism, whilst not strictly forbidding it's discouraged based on practical grounds such as health and social reasons, and so on and so forth. So the idea is Christians condemn this practice mostly because it is a practical or medical concern. It's not a strictly moral reason, right? So the medical reasons are that to avoid genetic risks to children, following local social norms, and avoiding family or community complications, right? So the idea is Christian perspectives on this matter, it can be divided, right? And the idea, or the thing I want to hit home about this particular passage is the reason why this was even implemented no longer exists as a common problem today. That is the most important thing. And because of that, we need to use our reason, practical and medical understanding to realize that these sorts of marriages are actually forbidden because of the scientific understanding we have nowadays regarding the ramifications of such unions. Okay, let's read the final verse in Numbers chapter 36 and the entire book of Numbers, Numbers chapter 36, verse 13. We read, "These are the commandments and the ordinances that the Lord commanded through Moses to the Israelites in the plains of Moab by the Jordan opposite Jericho." Biblical unlock number 3. Okay, so the final command and its implication, right? What is the wider principle that leaders should, or listeners should take from this particular verse? So I'm going to read it again because it's very short. "These are the commandments and the ordinances that the Lord commanded through Moses to the Israelites in the plains of Moab by the Jordan opposite Jericho." A law here balances private remedy with public stability. And the deeper principle here is that justice for an individual should not be pursued in a way that destroys the common good. Durable solutions honor both personal rights and communal structures. You need to see the bigger picture in this sense, right? You need to see the bigger picture and you need to be able to reconcile the potential problems that may arise as a result of one particular action. You may have good intentions, but good intentions are not always God intentions, right? So you need to be very careful about this point. Okay, let's see how this chapter fulfills Jesus Christ. Where in the past we had tribal land which preserved identity, the gospel actually redefines inheritance as belonging to God's family through faith. In Christ, the decisive markers of covenant membership are not tribal land or bloodlines, but a union with Him, a gift that transcends family boundaries while still honoring responsibility and stewardship, that reshapes how Christians think about property. It is trusted stewardship. It is not an ultimate security. As we read in Galatians chapter 3, verse 29, "And if you belong to Christ, then you are Abraham's seed and heirs according to the promise." What is the implication here? The verse signifies that faith in Jesus Christ actually creates a new spiritual identity that transcends earthly divisions like race, gender, or status, right? So all of these things which may be important to the covenant faithfulness, may be important to tribal balance, but these distinctions are merely unimportant as we are all spiritual heirs to the promise that God made to Abraham. Right, very nice. Let's go through some practical applications of what we have learned from this particular chapter. So, family stewardship is an important thing. Making a simple list of important assets, responsibilities in your household is actually a good way to have this level of stewardship and accountability. So for each, for example, for each responsibility or asset, it could be worthwhile having a set of rules, an update in the shared access plan, a written agreement about who does what. And this is important because it shows that you are capable of understanding what is important, what are the responsibilities, and who's going to direct them. It just adds structure, and structure is really important. And the second thing is community covenant conversation. If you lead a church or a group, you should schedule 30-minute discussion about how the community protects vulnerable heirs and prevents property from becoming a tool of exclusion. And this could be from anything, right? From basic policies for fair succession, transparent gifting, and pastoral oversight. Even the small things can be blasted out of context and can grow into something unrecognizably evil. So you have to be on guard. Alright, well, that's it for this episode of Biblical Unlocks. In this episode, we learned that Numbers chapter 36 revolves a practical crisis. The daughters have a right to inherit, and that's affirmed, but the tribal community is preserved by restricting marriages to within the tribe. Must note it, though, that this is a practical solution, a pragmatic solution that only applies in this particular time at this particular place, okay? It is not a binding rule. It is not encouraged by God or anything like that. All it is a practical solution. The chapter actually models a wider principle, which is faithful stewardship must protect both personal rights and the common good, right? And it calls us to continuity, legally and relationally and institutionally, so that a blessing can endure for a long time, so that the covenant can endure. Okay, so next time we're actually going to begin a new book of the Bible, very exciting, with Deuteronomy chapter 1. We're going to see Moses' first speech summarizing the wilderness and commissioning a new generation. We'll ask, how do memory and law together shape obedience as people prepare to enter the land? If you enjoyed this episode, please feel free to rate the show and follow. It's free, it helps me out a lot, and you can always change your mind later. Otherwise, just have a blessed day. And remember, if you're not in your word, you're in your feelings. Godspeed.